Hello, and thank you all for joining our webinar today on application portfolio management. I'm Deborah McGrath. Lily, if you want to advance that slide. Thank you. I'm Deborah McGrath. I'm a Senior Technical Product Marketing Manager with ServiceNow, and I'll be hosting the webinar today, where you're going to hear Lily Sukhsamlane and Connor Woodruff discuss application portfolio management, naughty or nice. And Connor is a senior solution consultant with ServiceNow, and Lily is a senior product marketing manager for our strategic portfolio management solutions. Both of them are APM subject matter experts, and they have a lot to say about whether an application is naughty or nice, as well as some great guidance on what to do about it as a takeaway present for all of you who are watching. So Connor and Lily, I know everyone is looking forward to this special holiday presentation. And Lily, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay, great. So let's talk about today's landscape in today's webinar, and we'll take a look at application portfolio management, and then what constitutes a naughty list, and then how to get off that naughty list and put yourself on the nice list. And we'll wrap it up with the demo and then with Q&A. So if we take a look at today's technology landscape, we're seeing IT spend increase year over year. And you've probably seen this in your daily life where, you're getting more and more apps to use at work. How do those apps integrate? Is there data transparency between the apps? And what we're seeing is as more organizations add apps into their environment, there's little data policy between the two because the change of pace is so rapid. And because there's little data transparency, we're also seeing data breaches that happen because of not rationalizing those applications. And then also those respondents in the survey that we looked at have only 60% of them have broken down data silos. So what we're seeing is continued growth, but less organization and less rationalization. So that's where the industry is heading, and the trends that we're seeing, but where are most organizations today? So even though the number of applications in your environment is continuing to increase, we're seeing that most organizations are continuing to manage those applications on manual or multiple spreadsheets. So there's really not a system of record or a single source of record that can help you organize all these new applications into your environment. Because those applications are managed in spreadsheets, we're seeing lack of alignment with the business. More and more businesses are, asking organizations to, hey, can I implement this new application in my environment? I have this business need. And yet, because those applications are on spreadsheets, there's lack of alignment of what applications do we currently have, what applications meet the need of the business, what applications can we retire? Which also leads to redundant applications. We have seen a lot of organizations have multiple applications that serve the same purpose. And then some of those applications are now at the end of life, or because they're redundant, there's just overall risk to the business. So, one of the things that we're looking at is what application do we have that can solve these business challenges? So ServiceNow has an application called Application Portfolio Management. There's 4 areas of application portfolio management that we can use to address these business challenges. So Connor, I'll hand it over to you and you can talk about each one of these areas.
Yeah, thanks, Lily. So to begin, we have what she mentioned, aligning to the business. So that's aligning your technology investments to business value. This is one reason why APM falls under the ITBM umbrella, because ultimately what APM is all about is allowing your enterprise architects to align to the business and identify opportunities for a demanded project pipeline. Next, we have reducing cost and risk in your business. So what we've seen in the IT environment is there's been such tremendous growth in spend and the number of applications people are acquiring that they're not really taking care of those old, riskier applications, and that's a massive security risk. So APM allows you to manage that as well. We also have information. So that's visibility across your applications to improve your governance. So this is where we can store what's called an information object. So you can see what sort of data you're storing within that application and how that might affect your application's need to comply with certain regulatory bodies. So this could be PCI, HIPAA, things like that. And then lastly, of course, we have managing the application portfolio. So this includes rationalizing and consolidating tools. So this is that typical app rationalization use case. So even though APM as a whole is a lot broader than that, this is the use case we're going to be zooming in on today.
So let's take a look at that app rationalization. So since this is the holiday special.
One moment, Lily. We're having a really difficult time hearing you.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
A little bit better. Can we try a little bit increased audio?
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. So since this is the holiday special, let's talk about how do we, what applications constitute being on that naughty list? So, what does it mean to be on the naughty list, Connor?
Yeah, and just to give some background on this, I come from an implementation background. So now I'm a solution consultant. I'm more on the sales side of things, but in a past life, I was doing implementation. So a lot of these come not only from a product perspective of this is what we're trying to achieve, but also a process perspective of some issues and shortfalls we've seen at our customers. So from a process perspective, we mentioned this earlier, that rapid growth in application inventory has led us to not have a single source of truth at a lot of organizations. So it's living in deprecated systems, not really supported tools, or even Excel spreadsheets. There's also little governance on the application lifecycle. This is especially apparent with retiring and onboarding new applications. So when we bring in a new application, are we asking our enterprise architects, do we already have something that does this? Or are we allowing any VP with a credit card to go acquire some new bespoke solution? And then on the flip side, retiring applications, are we really enforcing good technology management? And are we just removing the user base, or are we actually decommissioning that system? Moving forward, not measuring the health of applications, because even if we have a list in one place, that's not really useful if we're not doing anything with that list. So what we want to do is be able to measure the health from a business value and technical architectural health perspective, so that we can compare applications to each other for rationalization. We don't categorize our applications. So even if I have my inventory and have my health scores, we still need a way to know if our applications are redundant. So I need to know what my applications are doing from a function perspective. And then lastly, this kind of ties into the life cycle, but this is not having an application roadmap. So once we have that inventory and we're scoring our applications, we also want to know what we're doing on those applications. And this can be important because, for example, if we are expanding the use of an application, how does that align with the end of our technology lifecycle and end of support by the vendor? So it's important to keep all that in perspective as you're looking to take use of application portfolio management. And then from an application inventory perspective, so this is less process, this is more the actual inventory that you're tracking. Redundant applications. If we can move on to a big enterprise platform across the organization, then we have one user experience, one set of training, and hopefully we're using the best application for the job. No ownership or support structure. This is important, firstly, just from an operations perspective, but also from keeping your application inventory current. Because if you don't have ownership that you can send certification tasks to or keep that information up to date, then after a few months, then your inventory is not trustworthy anymore. Next, inconsistent definitions and breakdowns. So I'm going to put in a little plug here for the common services data model. So within ServiceNow, we have a data model across all of our products that has shared definitions and class structure, so that you can make sure that if I'm onboarding an application, it's actually a business application. For example, I don't want to onboard a microservice necessarily as a business application, because we're probably not doing strategic planning off of a microservice. Or I don't want to put in a software asset as a business application, things like that. So at ServiceNow, we do offer guidance to help our customers align to that data model. Next, incomplete or dated metadata. This kind of ties into that ownership naughty item, in that you want to make sure that your metadata is accurate and up to date. Otherwise, you can't really drive strategic decisions off of it. Maintaining high risk applications is a big no-no. So this goes back to that use case of not retiring those out of use or deprecated systems. And then, of course, not decommissioning those out of use applications. So with all that said, and with the context you brought up earlier, Lily, what are some things that you've seen customers doing that you think could be improved from a process perspective, especially as we see this IT environment grow so rapidly? How can organizations help organize that inventory?
Yeah, before we get there, I mean, as you were going down the naughty list, it definitely resonated with me. I've been in the IT industry for a long time. And when we do our app inventory, it's like, hey, how did that application get into the environment? And so when you're talking about, anyone with a credit card, hey, I want to do this trial version, and the trial version now becomes a, 3-year long license agreement. And it's like, well, we already have an application that supports this sort of functionality. And then our user base then gets confused, right? Is the company going with this new application, or are we doing our existing application? And there's just this whole, process mess down the line when those sort of things happen. Now, to answer your question, how can we get on the nice list? So let's actually take a look at that. So what can we do, Connor, to get us from that naughty list and move us over to that nice list?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, and you'll see this is kind of the inverse of what we had just seen, single source of truth. And this is really true of any process. And that's kind of ServiceNow's mantra, to be the platform of platforms. We want to get all these disparate data feeds into a single source of truth so we can actually manage that. Next, aligning your applications with business capabilities and financial portfolios. So once we have that single source of truth, we want to make sure we're aligning to the business. If IT is spending money, surely it should be to enhance the value to the business. So by having your applications in one place, and if you're doing broader ITBM activities in that same location, then you're able to make sure that every decision you're making is directly aligning to a capability or a business strategy. Next, as far as your application health, only gather application indicators that you can actually get. So a great example of this is the customer satisfaction score. So that seems like something that should be pretty easy to get, but then when you actually start to build out that process, you're like, wait, how do I actually get my customers' feedback within my application inventory? So that's something where you want to move as you mature to those more advanced automated data points. Another good example there is total cost of ownership. You don't need to be that complex to get value out of application scoring and out of APM. Really, you can get away with just sending an assessment to your application owners and to your architects around business value and your technical fit or your architectural fit. So less is more in that regard. Next, governance around the lifecycle of your applications. If you want to keep a single source of truth, you need to build governance around keeping that your single source of truth. So if I do a big effort to get my application inventory in the one place, I don't want 3 months down the line to have 100 applications that have been onboarded through an entirely separate process and then not get captured by my single source of truth. So putting guardrails and building process around that is really important. Now, in terms of your application inventory, how do you keep your application inventory healthy? Well, first, identify high-risk applications and modernize them, whether that means re-architecting that or moving on to a different application altogether. It's important that you're keeping track of your applications, not only from a business value perspective, but also around technology risk. Next, reduced wasted spend on redundant applications. This is kind of the primary use case of application rationalization. You don't want to be spending money on multiple applications that are doing the same thing. And not only from a just licensing perspective, but from a support perspective as well. You don't want to be spending money on support and development teams for multiple applications, as well as organizational change management around keeping those users happy and educated. Next, certifying the accuracy of your application data. We're not going to show that today, but there is a platform feature within ServiceNow called data certification. And what that allows you to do is to automate a process by sending out tasks to important stakeholders to certify, is your application data accurate? And it's also used in the CMDB, but a great example of this is the most simple example of a quarterly or yearly certification to your application owners to say, hey, is this metadata for my application still accurate? Is this application still in use? Is it, still on premise? What's the user base? Things like that are important because not only do you have accurate information, but also you're probably using some of that information for your scoring. And then lastly, clear ownership of applications drive process. This is where, from an OCM perspective, top-down leadership needs to be letting your application owners and your architects know that this is not a night job or a weekend job. This is part of your core responsibility as an application owner. You need to be tied into those APM processes and make sure that you're doing these activities so that your architects and your IT leaders are empowered to make decisions from your application portfolio. So yeah, go ahead, Lily.
I was just gonna say, you've said some really interesting things and it's all great on PowerPoint, but I'd actually like to see a demo if it's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me
All right, so
share my screen here. All right. So what you're seeing here is the application portfolio management portal. So the primary user of this would either be a portfolio manager or an enterprise architect, typically more of an enterprise architect. This portal is aligned to the TOGAF methodology. So you can see the 4 pillars of enterprise architecture here. We have our business portfolio. This is where your business capabilities would lie. We have our information portfolio. This is where those information objects are and where you can see, okay, this is the data we're storing on our applications. Now, what regulations or compliance processes are we now beholden to? Next, you have your application portfolio. This is where you'll be doing your application rationalization. And then lastly, your technology portfolio, where we're tying into our asset management so that we can see the technology life cycles underneath our applications. So we're not going to go over the whole portal today. However, we are going to dig into the application portfolio here, which is where we'll be doing our rationalization. So what you're seeing is essentially a categorization of our application portfolio. In ServiceNow, we call it application categories. This is essentially what the application is doing. It's the function of the application. Note that we can see all the metadata on those business apps as a part of this list. And this is configurable so we can add and remove fields. A great example of this, if I'm doing a cloud modernization effort, then I may want to target on-premise applications. So I could sort and identify applications off that criteria. And then we can also see our indicators here. So your application indicators, this is how we're measuring the health of those applications. We can get that from a number of sources. And by being in the ServiceNow platform, you're really empowered because we can tie into all those other great functions our application is doing. So for example, total change hours. Because we're running IT service management within ServiceNow, we can actually use those service metrics to affect our application scoring. This is all filterable as well. You'll also notice that we have a fiscal year toggle here. So these scores are captured over time. So if we want to look at past data or current data, we can take a look at that. This is also filterable. So if I wanted to, let's say, target applications with the CSAT of less than 3, then that'll go ahead and apply the filter over here. So let's jump into one of these application categories and see what rationalization in ServiceNow actually looks like. So here you'll see that filter still applied. If I clear that filter, we'll see this whole category here. You'll notice that our column quadrant labels are sustain, invest, replace. This is totally configurable. So if you want to align to more industry standards like Gartner's time model, you can absolutely do that. That's a pretty common use case with a lot of clients. You can also see over on the right here, all the applications within the category and their individual scores. And what's really powerful about this is right now we're looking at, the traditional functional fit versus business value. However, I can go and configure whatever indicators I want to. So these indicators can be a combination of queries from the CMDB, performance analytics, so you're doing reporting over time. They can be surveys to stakeholders. And by the way, the surveys can go to anyone in your user base and it's not going to require licensing, which is pretty powerful because in some other bespoke APM solutions, you're needing to pay to allow users to answer those survey questions. But in ServiceNow, you probably have your whole user base within ServiceNow, because if I want to reset my password, that's a use case for anyone in the organization. Any of those same users can also be stakeholders to answer questions to give you application data. So you'll see here we have a number of different configurations on the chart. These come from our application indicators. We're looking at functional fit versus business value. I could also look at usage score versus customer satisfaction. We actually also have a Z axis, which would be our bubble size. So here we could look at our application TCO. So you'll see we're looking at a very different chart now. So this allows your architects to really dissect and slice and dice how you're viewing your application portfolio. So what might have looked like a great application from a business fit and technical value perspective, or a business value technical fit perspective, might be very different when you involve usage and customer data. So you get a lot of power and configuration ability with the bubble chart here. And then we're not only a system of record and analysis, but also a system of action. So if I'm an architect and I come in here and I want to retire or rationalize an application, I can simply click one of these bubbles and then we've opened up a demand record. And now you're building out a business case, which could eventually become a project. So really the name of the game with APM is not only managing and keeping that application portfolio up to date, but also identifying opportunities to bring more value to the business and enter into that demand management process to build out a business case to eventually take action on that opportunity you identified.
Yeah, and Connor, I just want to jump in. I love how there's an interface where if I say, hey, what's our roadmap? What's our game plan? What do we need to replace? It's right there. And then if I say, all right, I see there's HP PPM that needs replacing, I like how you can workflow that to the next step, which, as you said, you can create a demand or a project, right? It's not just looking at the data, but you can take me to that next step of workflow.
That's absolutely right, Lily. And we have a load of other ways to identify those opportunities and other visualizations. We won't have time to get to those today, but just know that this is just one use case within APM. It's a lot broader than this, but really it's an enterprise architecture capability that allows you to find those opportunities. So I'm going to pass it back to Deborah, and I think we'll go over some Q&A.
Yeah, thank you, Connor and Lily, both for that great presentation and demonstration of APM rationalization. I just want to say when it comes to managing a naughty and nice list, the elf on a shelf just can't compete with the two of you. And Lily is definitely the best dressed elf I've seen in a while. So before we jump into the Q&A, what I'd like to do is just to take a minute to mention that on the last Thursday of every month, we present a webinar on new ITBM capabilities or enhancements to existing applications. And you can access this webinar as well as any of our prior last Thursday's webinars on demand from the ITBM forum at community.servicenow.com. And as Lisa mentioned at the top of the hour, we're currently planning our 2022 webinar series. So come back here and look for them soon in the ITBM forum, again, at community.servicenow.com. We also have a host of other product and thought leadership webinars across all our product lines, and they're available on demand from our events page at servicenow.com/events. So now we'll turn to our Q&A, and there have been a few questions popping in. I'm going to just pose them in the order that I saw them. First, we had a couple coming in the chat window. So there's also a Q&A. You can post them either. So the first question that came in was, what is ServiceNow definition of application versus software technology platform? And one of our attendees was kind enough to answer it, and I just thought I'd put it out there for any further discussion. So the answer provided was applications in ServiceNow are a set of functions or modules grouped together like demand management, project management, etc. People, please correct me if you think it's different. So I just wanted to put that out there, see if there was anything to add. You know, what are they? What do we call applications?
Yeah, so now we're really getting into common services data model territory. So I actually did a ServiceNow user group recently on CSDM, so maybe we can send out a link to that after this meeting. But at a high level, the business application and our CSDM definition, I have it pulled up right here, is a purchased or internally developed application used to support a business capability. So keywords there is used to support a business capability. At the APM level, the application is truly a conceptual stratification, where when you dive down into CSDM and get more into your CMDB, then you're going down into application service, which is where things get more real. That would be like a prod, dev, test environment. So that's a technology stack. And then you're tying in your discovery under that. So I think Ravi's comment was correct that it's almost grouped as a set of functions or modules. And the reason for that is because if you're rationalizing, I don't want to rationalize all of a platform. I want to rationalize modules or functions within that platform.
Appreciate it. So depending on where you're coming from, it can be esoteric.
A little bit, yeah. But we do offer guidance, yeah.
The next question that came in, thank you, Connor. The next question that popped in was the data certification task creation comes from the APM module. Actually, I think that's the question. The data certification task creation comes from the APM module. Is there a way to directly populate the application record via certification task?
Yes, so the data certification module is actually a platform feature. So you don't need APM to make use of that. And yes, it does allow you to directly update that information as long as that user has access to update that field. So for example, an application owner, they already have access to update most of the fields on their application form. Any of those fields they have access to update, instead of failing a certification, then you need to build a whole process. They can just update that field and then certify it in the certification task itself.
Perfect. Thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. Connor, I've got this one for you. Is there a best practice on how to get started with APM, rationalizing my applications?
Yeah, so an APM kind of sits in the middle of a lot of our products. So first, most important step is always going to be build out your application inventory and align that to a common definition, which I would highly recommend you use our CSDM definition. And within the common services data model, we do offer a maturity model, a crawl, walk, run structure. So I would encourage those of you who want to make use of APM, first step would be build out your application inventory, get it in one place, align to a common definition, and build it out if you're doing it in ServiceNow, especially following CSDM.
Thank you, Connor. And thank you, Lily. And that's all the time we have today. I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us. And the last thing I'd like to say is happy holidays.
Thanks, everybody.